pleased to introduce our speaker, Jean Lamy Belzil, who took office in September 2022 as Public and Governmental Affairs Advisor at the Quebec Government Office in Chicago. And Jean has been with us several times during the last 2 days, jumping in on various parts by Zoom in our presentations. Jean is in charge of promoting Quebec interests and Quebec-U.S. partnerships across 12 states in the Midwest in several key sectors such as education, government relations, communications, and Francophonie. She was previously working for the Ministry of International Relations and La Francophonie in Quebec City as executive assistant for the Assistant Deputy Minister as well as advisor at the Africa and Middle East Division. She graduated from Laval University with a bachelor's degree in economics and political science and a master's in public administration. So she is bilingual. French would be her primary language, but I've asked her to speak this morning in English. So please join me in welcoming Jean Lamy Belzil.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you for having me this morning. So can you hear can you see the screen? Yeah, things working?
Yes.
Great. So bonjour, good morning, everyone. As Chad mentioned, I'm Jean Lamy Belzil, and I work as Public and Governmental Affairs Advisor at the Quebec office in Chicago. So I started this position about 2 years ago. I'm from Quebec City, so it's a 3 to 5 year posting. So happy to be with you this morning. First off, I wanted to start. Oh, okay, can I? Just trying to change. Chad, I just get okay. Yes, so I just wanted to start with a couple of things that make me think of Quebec, and maybe it rings a bell for you as well. So, of course, when you think about Quebec, I think you think about poutine. So it's a famous dish that was created in Quebec. On your right, you have the Chateau Frontenac. So it's a famous hotel in Quebec City, but also a former fort that represents the foundation of Quebec. And then on your left, you have the NHL team, the Canadiens, the Montreal Canadiens. So this hockey team was actually a strong symbol of identity affirmation for French Canadians back in the days. The team was founded in 1909, and the Canadiens are the oldest continuously operating professional ice hockey team worldwide. So initially, it used to be the team of the Francophone community in Montreal. The founders named the team Les Canadiens, a term identified at the time with French speakers. And the fourth picture is a sugar shack in maple taffy, because as you probably know, maple syrup is a pride for Quebec, since about 70% of the world production, maple syrup production, is produced in Quebec. So just want to give you a quick overview. Unfortunately, I think Missouri is not on the map. Sorry about that, but just to locate it, to be able to locate where is the province of Quebec. So you can see on the map Quebec City and Montreal. So Quebec City is the capital of the province, where all the provincial ministries and the parliament are located. And Montreal is more like the big city, the big business city of Quebec. So Quebec is a Canadian province with a vast territory of 1.67 million square kilometers, with thousands of lakes and rivers, and it's approximately 3 times the size of France. So just to give you an idea, but with only 8.6 million of people located mostly along the St. Lawrence River. So Quebec population is about the quarter of the Canadian population. The specificity about the province is that 80% of the population is French-speaking, even if almost half of the population can speak and understand English as well. So since 1974, French has been the only official language of the province, although some government services remain accessible in English. But Quebec has this distinction of being bilingual and constitutional and federal levels, since both French and English are official languages in the country, in Canada, but it remains unilingual at the provincial level. I think it's also important to underscore that there are 11 recognized Indigenous nations in Quebec, each with their own identity, a history, a language, and culture all of their own. The 10 First Nations and the Inuit Nation represent just over 1% of Quebec's population. And over 10,000 Inuit live in northern villages on the shores of Ungava Bay, Hudson Strait, and Hudson Bay. I would say that Quebec is usually seen as a progressive nation and an egalitarian society, since the province has universal public health care and school system. For instance, also the province has 1 year paid parental leave, a public daycare system, etc. So it's a very inclusive province, nation as well. So maybe you're asking yourself why Quebec has its own network of representations abroad. So actually, the action abroad of the province is guided and framed by the Canadian Constitution. So in a nutshell, provincial jurisdictions can be extended on the international level, such as culture, education, part of immigration, economic development. So subnational governments can play a significant role in global affairs. The better example is Quebec, but there are also other examples such as Ontario, Bavaria in Germany, Catalonia in Spain, Flanders or Wallonia in Belgium. So they are not countries, but they all have offices abroad representing their region, their specificity, their population, their companies, their universities, etc. So the government of Quebec has a long history of effective international engagement and in many ways has been a pioneer of subnational diplomacy. So in Quebec, the Ministry of International Relations and La Francophonie is responsible for promoting and defending Quebec's interests and expertise at the international level. So Quebec offices are not therefore in charge of any consular affairs, since this is a federal competency. So Canadian consulates or embassies are the one in charge of consular cases. So we don't deliver any passport. So this is the responsibility of the consulates. As you can see on the photos, Quebec officials lead their own international action and can meet with foreign dignitaries. So on your right, you can see the Premier of Quebec, François Legault, meeting with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. Actually, Premier Legault is currently in France for the Sommet de la Francophonie. And on your left, you can see Macky Sall, the Senegalese president, the former Senegalese president, actually, meeting with our Minister of International Relations and la Francophonie, Martine Biron. So basically my boss. More specifically about my office, so about the Quebec government office in Chicago. So the office was established in 1969. aims to promote Quebec-Midwest exchanges, new partnership in several areas such as business, culture, education, francophonie, and the office covers 12 states across the Midwest, which includes, of course, Missouri. So that's a vast territory to cover. We are a team of 15 people at the delegation. So besides the Public and Governmental Affairs Department, we have a Trade Department and the Foreign Direct Investment Department. So I would say that most of my colleagues promote and support Quebec companies doing business in the Midwest, since, of course, the United States are our most important trading partner for Quebec. So as the official language in Quebec is French, Quebec is a full member of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. So this organization is dedicated to promoting the French language and political, educational, economic, and cultural cooperation among the 88 member countries of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. We estimate over 321 million French speakers across 5 continents. And according to a recent study, there are more than 2.1 million French speakers in the US. So Quebec is very involved in promoting francophonie abroad through the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, but also through its network of representations. So I work with the Alliance Française, with French departments, universities, with the French consulate, the Canadian consulate as well, and with historical and French societies. So the second part of my presentation will focus more on the history of Quebec. Of course, I'm not an historian, but I think I use reliable sources. So I will tell you a bit more about the most important chapters in Quebec history. So the history of Quebec did not start, of course, with the European explorers. There was and continues to be a large population of indigenous peoples called First Nations, as well as Inuit peoples on the territory. So when the Europeans arrived, 3 main indigenous groups shared the territory of Quebec: the Algonquins, the Iroquoians, and the Inuit. So well before the 16th century, the Vikings had also explored the shores of the American continent for cod fishing. Officially, the French presence in America begins with the voyage of Jacques Cartier in 1534, who plans a cross on behalf of the King of France in Gaspé, so in the province of Quebec. So at that time, Europeans were still looking for a new route to Asia. But in 1534, Jacques Cartier didn't stay in Canada. He returned to France with 2 indigenous people. And then he came back to Canada 1 year later in 1535, and then a third time in 1541, this time with several men. They were still looking for diamonds and gold, but they realized that none of this was in Canada, so they went back to France. So actually, this is only in 1608 with Samuel de Champlain, so the founder of Quebec City, that the French regime is actually established and the province is colonized. So between 1534 and 1763, Quebec was the most developed colony of New France, as well as New France's center, responsible for a variety of dependencies like Acadia, Louisiana, and the Pays d'en Haut. Common themes in Quebec's early history as Canada include the fur trade because it was the main industry, as well as the exploration of North America. 1759 marks the end of the French regime with the Battle of the Plain of Abraham. So les Plaines d'Abraham are located in Quebec City. The battle was between the French, along with their indigenous allies, against the British. So, long story short, the British won. And so, this battle was a major one for the French, since shortly after France lost Quebec. So, in 1763, 4 years later, France ceded all Canada to Great Britain, and the era of New France was over. So until Confederation in 1867, Great Britain controlled the colonies that would become Canada. One of the lingering consequences of this conquest is the power struggle over a dominant language. So before 1763, most of Quebec was part of New France, and as a result, the common language was French. After France ceded Quebec to Great Britain, it became a British colony, but inhabitants, including Acadians and First Nation, were granted some degree of rights over their language and religion. So Catholicism in the case of the French Canadians, especially because of the number. French Canadians at that time were numerous compared to English. So at that time, life was not easy in Quebec. So the province was not very developed, I would say. There was, and there still is, a harsh climate and poor living conditions. So British were not very tempted to settle in Quebec. And at the same time, French Canadians had a very high birth rate. In 1837 and 1838, French Canadians militants in Lower Canada took up arms against the British Crown in a pair of insurrections. So the twin rebellions killed more than 300 people. They followed years of tensions between the colony's Anglophone minority and the growing nationalistic aspiration of its Francophone majority. The rebels, the French Canadian rebels, failed in their campaign against British rule. However, their revolt led to political reform, including the unified province of Canada. The rebellion of Lower Canada, which is also known as the Patriots' War, also gave French Canadians one of the first nationalist heroes in Louis-Joseph Papineau. So the Canada Foundation, in 1867, the British North American colonies unite to form Canada. The Dominion of Canada became a confederation, and the provinces retained significant powers. At that time, the majority of business and government transactions in English are in Quebec are in English. And after World War II, French Canadians are, I would say, at an economic disadvantage and can rarely aspire to management positions. Nevertheless, despite the power of the English-speaking communities, French Canadians remained more numerous. So the church was still omnipresent and had great power in society. Schools and hospitals are run by Catholic Church. And also because of the bad conditions, about almost 1 million French Canadians immigrated to the US for lack of jobs or adequate living conditions in Quebec. We call it this period the Great Hemorrhage. Some of them would also move to the Midwest. Just for the story, my great grandfather was actually born in Michigan. So the conditions were not very good for French Canadian in Quebec. So after these darker years, French Canadians realized that they must take charge of their own destiny if they want to aspire for a better future. The Quiet Revolution. So this period was marked by the secularization of the government, the establishment of a welfare state, a shift in political alignment toward federalist and sovereignist, separatist faction, and the eventual election of a pro-sovereignty provincial government in the 1976 election. So a primary change was an effort by the provincial government to assume a greater control over healthcare and education, both of which had previously been under the purview of the Catholic Church. So to achieve this, the government established ministries of health and education, expanded the public service, made substantial investments in the public education system, and permitted the unionization of the civil service. So it was a very important era for Quebec history. Additionally, measures were taken to enhance Quebecois control over the province's economy, including the nationalization of electricity production and distribution with the establishment of Hydro-Quebec. So during this period, French Canadians in Quebec also adopted the term Québécois to distinguish themselves from both the rest of Canada, but also to France. So at this time, the Quebec government also adopted the Charter of the French language and in 1977. So the main objective was to preserve, to protect the quality and status of the French language. After the Quiet Revolution, I would say that Quebec became more technologically advanced and industrialized nation like many other nations or countries. So the province has stood out in many areas such as aerospace with Bombardier, arts and culture with Cirque du Soleil, or even with regarding women rights. So Quebec was now more internationally oriented, whether it was at the political level or with trade or culture. So I would say that nowadays, Quebec is indeed a French-speaking province surrounded by an English-speaking ocean, but we are still North American. So I think it's very interesting for Americans to come to Quebec and realize that, in fact, many of your ancestors actually came from Quebec. For instance, the village of Sainte-Geneviève in Missouri was settled by French Canadians around 1735 on the west bank of the Mississippi River. The village was one of several important French communities forming a region known as the Illinois Country, part of the vast territory held by France in North America back in the days. In conclusion, I just wanted to show you some pictures of our most beautiful regions or attractions in Quebec. Actually, there's now a new direct flight between St. Louis and Montreal. So it's not that far from Joplin. And so I highly recommend the trip to Quebec. If you, I mean, it's very, I would say it's pretty unique. It's very different. You have this European touch, but also great, can have a great experience with very beautiful nature and other cultural attractions. So I wanted to finish maybe my presentation with this quote from a song very famous from Gilles Vigneault, one of our most famous poet and singer. So that's "C'est mon pays, ce n'est pas un pays, c'est l'hiver." So my country is not a country, it's winter. So that's it. So thank you. And if you have any question, that is it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. If anyone has a question, let me bring you the mic because this is being recorded and it's also live on Zoom. Mr. Cragen.
Yes, I wondered if there's any movement toward secession. It seems the last vote was taken in '95 and the trend was toward secession.
Yes.
I'm not sure if secession is the right word.
Yeah, usually we say independence, yeah, or sovereignty. I would say that there is not necessarily a movement, as the current government is not like in favor of independence, but it's still like in the air since like of the two political parties at the parliament are in favor of sovereignty. So it's not like a current, I would say, debate, but it still exists since like there are two political parties in favor of this at the parliament. So of course it's part of the discussion, but it's not in the like the day-to-day debate. And I'm not sure like the young generation is very aware of this this issue, this discussion.
So just in summary, there isn't quite the strong movement as there was in 1995 for Quebec independence, because nearly 50% of the population wanted to leave Canada at that time.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't think we don't feel this same movement.
Other questions?
Dr. Stebbins says that I have to tell you that I studied in Montreal, so
Okay.
there's that.
Did you enjoy your experience?
I did. It was great, and it really helped me with my fluency. So,
Okay, where did you study?
Université de Montréal.
Ah, ok, donc vous parlez français. Super.
My question is just, I'm curious about what the major companies or organizations that your department works with in the Midwest.
Yeah, I would say mostly about green energy, aerospace. As you probably know, the American headquarters of Bombardier is based in Kansas, Wichita. Also, and Montreal is like the third hub in aerospace worldwide. Also a lot with creative industries. So as you probably know, Montreal is very good at like downtown activations and arts installations. So many cities in the Midwest work with Montreal-based companies in downtown activation. You probably, maybe you know Moment Factory. Also electrification of transportation. The company Lion Electric, they make electric school buses, and they have an American plant in Joliet, Illinois. So yes, EV charging stations with Flow. This is a Quebec company, but they also have a facility in Michigan. So yes, I would say green energy, electrification of transportation, aerospace, cultural industries, water technologies. So yeah, it's very diverse.
Merci.
Our next question comes from Dr. David Adams, retired history professor at Missouri State University.
Thank you.
I'm nervous.
Thank you. 20 years ago, 2004, my wife and I visited Quebec in the spring, and one of the things I recall from that visit was that we were told that there was a great deal of concern about the declining birth rate. And of course, there was a migration you mentioned earlier, but generally, how do you account for that decline that occurred between the formation of Canada and earlier, perhaps, and the late or the beginning of the 21st century?
So your question is if it's still like a matter of concern for Quebec? Yes. Yes, I would say yes, since Quebec has still, I think, one of the lowest birth rate in North America. of course, as all the other Canadian provinces, Quebec welcome many immigrants every year, and we are facing one of the biggest issue in Quebec is the lack of workforce. So we try to attract people from France, Morocco, Tunisia, to come to work, come working in Quebec. So yeah, this is a big issue for Quebec, but I know this is an issue for many other like provinces in American states. But yes.
Thank you.
I think you noted that only 45% of Canadians speak both English and French. Is English not taught routinely in the schools?
In Quebec, I mean, like about 45% of the population in Quebec speak and understand both French and English. But yes, I would say that now, maybe starting at 7 or 8 years old, English is taught at school. So I guess this in like 20 or 30 years, I guess the percentage will be like there will be maybe 70% of the population that will speak both French and English, because yes, they meant more and more, like even at elementary school, you will do the first like 4 months in French and the other half of the year in English. So yes, I think it's a priority for at school to learn English and also other languages.
Other questions?
And there are also English speaking schools, even at primary level.
We have several English faculty and English students in the audience. Maybe you could speak to the literature of Quebec, who some of the famous authors are, novels.
You mean in English or in French?
Either.
Yeah, I have to admit that I don't read a lot of English English novel, English speaking author from Quebec. I know that there's a very famous one, Louise Penny, I think. It's like anyway. So actually I don't know much about English literature, but if you want any recommendation of books in French from Quebec authors, happy to give some recommendations.
Other questions? Anything from Ontario? Any rebuttals? You're going to hear from Ontario next hour, and Earl Provo is here. And
So you heard from Maya, our student who studied there, but how possible would it be for an English-speaking student to come and spend a semester in Quebec?
In Quebec, there are like 18 universities, and 3 of them are English-speaking universities. So you have McGill and Concordia in Montreal, and also Bishop's University in Sherbrooke. So of course, if you don't speak French, you can still study in Quebec, but you're gonna have to choose like your English-speaking universities, which is possible and common. So yes, this is still possible.
Canada used to have 2 Major League Baseball teams, the Toronto Blue Jays and the Montreal Expos.
Yes.
You lost the Expos in 2004. Is there hope of bringing another Major League Baseball team back to Montreal?
I'm not sure actually. I know that a lot of people would love to have a new team, but I'm not really aware of this discussion. Maybe Earl is more aware than me.
See, that's why we're able to call it the World Series, because we have multiple countries, at least two. So
Yes, but I know that in Quebec City would love to have again a new hockey team, because maybe you remember the Nordic. So
what
used to.
happened to your hockey team?
Actually, they moved to Colorado, so now we only have the Canadian in Montreal. So that was the big rivalry. It was not between Quebec and Ontario, actually. It was between Canadien Montreal and the Nordic, the real rivalry.
Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you, Jean, for your presentation. And
My pleasure.
at 11 o'clock, we'll be back here to learn about Amazing Ontario. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good day.